welcome to Forbidden Planet TV, and on today's episode we are joined by the fantastic author of The Night Ends with Fire, K.Et Song. Hello, how's it going?
Good, thank you for having me.
Very, very happy to have you. I just literally come out of the storm that's brewed outside, but I'm so looking forward to chatting about your... So this isn't your first book, but this is your debut fantasy.
That's correct.
So would you say you knew what to expect from writing before, or was it a whole different thing this time around?
That's a great question. I would say that there are some similarities and some differences. In terms of the voice, I felt like there were very many parallels, actually, because An Echo in the City, my debut novel, it's young adult, but YA readers these days are really used to darker and more mature content, especially given social media and how pervasive the news is to every aspect of life. And so in that sense, I didn't really have to age up or down the voice between my YA and my adult fantasy. That being said, writing fantasy is just a different ball game where you're building out the world, you're thinking through what are the political implications, the economic implications, how does this magic system affect not only the main character's psyche, but also long-term implications for how they'll build up their kingdom and the government system in the future. So that to me was both challenging and also very fun, and not something that I was really thinking through for my YA, which is about the real world and Hong Kong, how it is or how it was back in 2019.
Would you say then potentially that there's a different kind of planning in a way, like, because have you got like a world Bible, for example, that like sits alongside?
That's so funny because I should, but I don't. And I've read books by fantastic authors such as Fonda Lee, who wrote the Greenbone Saga, where you can just tell, she's a master world builder and she must have the most extensive Bible or whatever to create her comprehensive world. For me, I'm more so someone who plans as I go, aka does not plan. And so essentially, like, as I'm writing, I'll realize, oh, this magical power needs a consequence or needs a cost, both to the character's mental state, but also their exterior state. And that'll be, then I'll add in a bookmark or add in a note about, the magic system in the book allows the character to have this sixth sense. And so I thought it would be fitting for them to then lose a sense that we have today when you overuse your magical ability. And it plays with the idea of qi, which is life force or your vital energy in Chinese culture. And so in that sense, when Meilin overuses her qi, she actually loses her sight. And other characters will lose their hearing or some other ability that they have, given that their body is sort of breaking down from overuse of magic.
It was an absolutely fascinating kind of, I just love a good magic system. I think that really kind of, it can make or break a book. And it was like you said, kind of the idea that it's kind of taking away from you, that it's something very powerful, but it's not something that, like you're not, I don't know, level 99 like mage in D&D or whatever, that you can just keep on firing.
Exactly. And that's my pet peeve when it comes to fantasy, when you can use this immense power but there's no cost to you or the world.
Yeah.
Because in our real world, that's just not the case when it comes to, there isn't magic maybe, but like there's wealth, there's social capital, and for all those things, when you use too much of it, you lose it in other ways.
Yeah, there has to be a consequence. So yeah. So we've dived right in, but for anyone out there who isn't familiar with your book yet or hasn't picked it up yet, what is your kind of quick elevator pitch to like hook people in?
Definitely. So I would call The Night Ends with Fire my version of a dark fantasy Mulan retelling, but if Mulan was motivated out of selfish ambition rather than filial piety.
Wow.
And it's got all the tropes that I loved as a kid. There's enemies to lovers, there's a love triangle, all the angst and pining that you could want. I grew up on Chinese dramas, which are just very big on forbidden love, star-crossed romance, and angst and pining. So I just put it all in there.
Plus I like the Mulan idea, because the kind of, I suppose, the Wushu like dragon equivalent is very different.
Very different.
Very different. Kind of more sinister element.
I would say so.
Yeah, definitely, but very, very interesting. So to kind of start with, where did the ideas come from? Was it more, did the characters come first for you, or was it about the kind of world building?
I would say every story is different. For this particular story, it came to me actually in a half dream, which is very cliche, but it's actually how this one occurred. And as I was falling asleep one night, this was back in 2021, and so I was middle of pandemic, feeling very burned out, both from the news and also from working on my debut novel, which is a much more serious topic. And I remember thinking about the escapist literature that I read as a kid, where it was usually high fantasy. There was usually some sort of compulsive plot that made you just get hooked in and want to keep reading. And you weren't really reading for wanting to seem cool or literary or any of the motivations that we find ourselves falling into as adults. You were reading purely for the love of the story. And so I wanted to go back to that childlike self with this story. And as I was falling asleep, the words came to me of girl hungry for power and dragon that feeds off of greed. And that was sort of the spark that began to germinate in my mind that, grew The Night Ends with Fire. And I remember just drafting that in such a fog state because I truly just skipped all the parts that I didn't want to read as a kid and wrote the parts that were almost like dessert to me. And so in that sense, I've heard from readers that the pacing moves quickly. And I think a big part of that is because I was writing for myself and writing for the scenes that I would want to read as a kid.
I love that. And I love that you remembered your dream, because obviously so many of us wake up and just like, I'm sure I had a brilliant idea.
So I think the trick is don't bother leaving a notebook and a pen on your bedside table, because you will not be able to read your handwriting the next morning. I just use the Notes app on my iPhone, and I will actually have a pinned note, so it'll always stay on the top of your screen. And that's really helpful for when you have a conversation with a friend and they say something very interesting or an insight from walking down the street. It all goes in there.
Wow, okay. The top tip. I mean,
the world is our source of inspiration.
There you go. So you have at the start of each chapter, so as people are kind of working through, you obviously have kind of the quotes at the start of each chapter. So what was the idea behind the kind of quotes, and are they a combination of kind of i.e. real live quotes and kind of quotes you've kind of found or made up? Tell us more about that.
I love that you noticed those quotes. Unfortunately, they're all made up. Magic does not exist in our real world.
See, I was hoping.
But what's so funny is that I had a reader ask me that too. And I think that hopefully that speaks to the fact that they sort of pay homage to the historical texts that we read growing up, because I wanted to emulate that style of voice and that tradition of writing. And so The Night Ends with Fire is actually based off of two different texts. One of them is Meilin. The other one is Romance of the Three Kingdoms, which is a Chinese classic novel that most kids in China will read in junior high or high school. And it is just the most epic scale fantasy. There are three warlords sort of fighting for power amongst these three kingdoms, and one of the stories I grew up on loving as a kid. However, for that particular story, there are hundreds of characters and yet maybe 3 or 4 women. And the women are always either damsels in distress or cunning shrews that will then get killed by the end of the story. And I really wanted to write a feminist retelling both of Meilin but also of Romance of the Three Kingdoms, while paying homage to all the epic scale and the things that I love about these texts. And so the epigraphs were a way for me to sort of use that flair and that style of writing, which I felt was so epic and intense and interesting, but also incorporating modern day elements of women that are not damsels in distress, women that are not just one-dimensional shrews, but also women that have their own flaws and mistakes. Because I think one of the things that I struggle most about with the Meilin classic is that Meilin as a character is almost too perfect to be real, in the sense that she is so motivated by her sense of duty and honor and filial piety, and completely selfless in her devotion to both her family and her kingdom. And so in this book, I'm a big supporter of women's rights, but I'm also a supporter of women's wrongs in that sense. And I wanted to center a heroine that would, openly have flaws and be someone that readers can root for, yes, but also relate to in that sense.
You can definitely tell, like, and it's wonderful to read, like, that the characters are flawed, that you can kind of see, you know, what they're kind of struggling with. But also things, for example, like the kind of trope of like the evil stepmother, that you haven't kind of gone for kind of the obvious, which I loved. I loved that she's just, you know, it just feels like a more fleshed out, more like supportive character, rather than going for the almost Disney-esque like evil stepmother kind of trope.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, it's just wonderful to read. Like, so good. So I had a lot of fun.
And I don't know, I think I was inspired by Snow White, where I just felt like the way that the evil queen and Snow White interacted, in the way that beauty can only be carried by one woman, as in one beautiful woman hurts the existence of another beautiful woman. I just always had trouble with that growing up, given that wasn't what I saw in my family and amongst my you know, sisters, mothers, etc. And I think it was a natural progression where I created this stepmother character. I knew that I wanted to demonstrate different types of female strength. And I feel like Sho Ying was a perfect example of someone who, you know, doesn't know how to use a sword and isn't very physically active like me. However, she can demonstrate strength in other ways.
Yes, yeah. Needs must, as as it says. But yeah, it was just the characters especially was so interesting. And obviously we touched on the dragon character before, which is just kind of not quite a foil, but just an interesting kind of, you know, you almost expect the kind of cutesy sidekicks and stuff that you often get, and especially kind of, I don't know, like anime and stuff like that, you'll get like the cutesy, like, oh, but yeah, that not so cute at times.
I will say, without naming names, I've read some books in the past where you have these benevolent gods or spirit creatures, and they purely exist as vehicles for the main character to receive power. And I wanted the dragons and the other spirits to have their own agency, but also their own agendas, which may or may not align with Meilin's. And, you know, the humans in the book are very much focused on their own human war and what's happening in the physical world. But there's another realm beneath it, which is the spirit realm, and there are shenanigans happening over there that Meilin thinks she understands, but actually the dragon has his own intentions and motivations.
Yes, yeah. It feels as if there's a whole heap of stuff, which I'm sure will be coming in the next book, but a whole like heap of stuff like bubbling underneath, which is quite exciting. So have you kind of planned out, it's because you're saying before about obviously planning everything out with this book, is the second book kind of all figured out in your head? Do you know exactly?
So the second book is actually finished, first draft currently. And I will say that English readers are some of the most astute readers, because for the first time yesterday at the signing at Waterstones, one of the readers said, and I won't spoil anything here, I noticed you had X scene. Does that mean something for book 2? And she nailed it head on. And no one has ever pointed that out to me before. And so I did tell her a slight spoiler, but I feel like she earned it.
Okay, no, she's done the work. So. But how do you keep your poker face? You know, if someone kind of says something, you're just like, maybe. Maybe that happens, I don't know. So we have as well, obviously, other fantastic characters and a love triangle, which we always obviously love to see. It's quite interesting when kind of writing characters and writing that dynamic. People will have their favourite characters and they'll root for them. Who was your favourite character to actually write?
Can I ask who was your favourite to read? Well, out of pure curiosity.
This was quite interesting. I think I was most intrigued by the dragon character. Like I do have a little soft spot for Sky as well, but I just love I'm a huge, like, I play a ton of Japanese role-playing games, and I've read like the Water Margin and stuff like. I love spirit stuff. Yes. So that's my kind of my takeaway.
Oh, so you definitely understand the tradition in which, you know, this book is coming from.
It's so wonderful, and I'm currently playing. So there was a series called Suikoden, which was based on the Water Margin that I grew up playing. And they recently kickstarted like a game to, it's not a direct kind of sequel, but it's kind of with those same ideas of collecting kind of characters as if they're like spirits of destiny, and that they all have their part to play into, you know, bring the world to order, and it's just fascinating. So yeah, this is that, it really, really spoke to me.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear that.
I yeah, it was just wonderful.
To answer your question, I think that my favorite character to write was, I don't want to say Meilin because that's a boring answer. She was the easiest to write, I will say. Her voice came to me very naturally.
Okay.
I will say that I love writing dialogue, and I love unhinged dialogue. And so in that sense, I don't know if I can say this. Maybe I'll say someone else, actually, because I don't want to spoil anything. I think Sparrow was a fun character to write.
Okay, yeah.
I think he's someone that we all have in our lives. Just someone who's humorous, good-hearted, well-intentioned, but someone who at the end of the day is very much a rule follower.
Yes.
Who abides by the norms of our existing society.
Yeah. Yeah, that could make sense. And it's interesting because quite often, I suppose certain, like, people's favourite characters can cause a lot of discussion, and a lot of people kind of agree or disagree. I remember a while back we were talking to V. Schwab about, like, favourite characters in Vicious, and, you know, saying, oh, you know, no one likes this particular character, and then one person in the audience was like, I do. It's just like, that person.
Yeah.
So that, yeah,
and that's what I love so much about writing fiction, because it truly is one of the most subjective art forms. And so in that sense, you have readers who will love something that is in here, and some readers who will hate the same thing. And that's really why I think most writers try to write for themselves, because you cannot please everyone outside of yourself.
Yes. Yeah. It would be impossible, I think, to please. But you've done such a wonderful job. So. So we have to touch on I suppose the kind of the magic system, as we touched on before, and the idea of I suppose, like, balance. Because in a way there's the elements of water, there's the elements of fire, like with the phoenix. Was the kind of elemental elements, like, important to bring kind of the magic all together for you?
Definitely. I think it's a big part of Chinese culture as well, where I really wanted to demonstrate that nothing is purely good or purely evil. It's all part of a system of balance and of too much or too little. And in the same way, the spirit creatures, even though the dragon does have some sinister intentions, they're not innately good or evil either. It's more so on what side of the scale do you stand on. And I think Meilin realizes too that people that she initially assumed were her enemies may actually have been very valuable allies had she made different decisions. And in the same way, people who she assumed right off the bat were her friends may turn out to be her greatest villains. And so I think balance is such a key part of just the Asian way of looking at the world. And so that comes into with the seasons, with the directions, with the elements as well. And it was just something that Meilin really uses to ground herself in both her martial arts ability, but also in her ability to use the dragon spirit power.
Plus, as well, like you said before, about the idea that she isn't perfect. Like, there is a point where she loses a competition, doesn't she? And I liked that, because you don't want to see your kind of hero come out, like, fully, like, top of the class in a way. Like, it just makes you root for them more. But as I said,
I always root for the underdog.
Yeah.
And there are definitely times where she loses her, can I swear on this?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
She loses her cool, I'll say. And in those senses, it's also where the excess is too much.
Yes.
And that's a big part of the Li Sha system in this book, where what the fantasy world is saying is that we all have this balance of elements in our body, but spirits are drawn to an excess. And so when they see that, for example, Meilin's case, she has too much ambition or greed, and again, too much is relative, right? That is what draws the dragon to her. And then when she uses his power, her ambition also grows similarly. And to the point where by the end of the novel, she has trouble recognizing who she was at the start of her journey and what she initially set out to do.
Yeah, so much kind of change. I'm so intrigued to obviously find out what happens in the next book with them. We also have the idea of the use of the number 7, and like the idea of both, I suppose, the religious kind of overtones to that, as well as like numerology and how I think 7 is kind of associated with like again kind of that idea of balance. Was that again kind of something that was specifically?
A lot of the decisions in the book actually came about subconsciously or unintentionally.
Mm-hmm.
And I think because I was, again, writing it in sort of this fugue state where I was writing it so quickly, and actually the first draft was finished in 1.5 months.
Wow.
And so, and then obviously many rounds of revision came after that. I think that there are sometimes where a metaphor comes in or a motif comes in that wasn't quite intentional, but was probably influenced by cultural upbringing and different sources of media that I consumed and adored as a kid.
Yeah, no, definitely. And the I just love the fact that probably one of the most positive things that came out of lockdown is we've had some absolutely fantastic books, because I suppose people had more time on their hands to kind of think about things and have these like crazy dreams that that turned into this, which is amazing. So we're coming towards the end of our interview now. So with kind of like novels, things like, for example, Shanghai Immortal, and books like that have come out in the last kind of year to 18 months that are just bringing kind of attention to a whole kind of world of folklore and mythology and history. Is there any kind of like books that you would recommend to our people watching at home?
Definitely. I am extremely looking forward to A Song to Drown Rivers by Anne Leong, which will be coming out in October. And also just did a reread of Immortal Longings by Chloe Gong, which is such a favorite of mine. It's enemies to lovers to enemies, which, as you can probably tell from the Names of Fire, I'm a big fan of. And then lastly, I mentioned the Greenbone Saga earlier, but if you are an emerging writer looking to improve your world building, highly, highly recommend, because Fonda Lee just does world building to another level.
Yeah, that's some wonderful, wonderful recommendations. And Chloe Gong, we were very lucky to do an event with her when she was last over, and it was the funnest event.
Yes, she's so fun. And every time we see each other, we're always like literally fighting to pay the bill. And so unfortunately she's a bit stronger than me, but I'm preparing for next time.
You could take her. And to finish the interview today, so I always like to ask obviously what you're working on next, and if there's any other projects, and also what you're currently watching, reading, and if you game, what are you playing? So there are kind of last few questions.
Oh, I love this question. I just came back from San Diego Comic-Con, and I actually was a huge Pokemon nerd growing up. And being at Comic-Con, I fought with my blood, sweat, and tears to get some Pokemon swag from their booth there. So that was really fun, and was playing with the game a bit with my brother and sister. And in terms of I haven't been watching a lot lately. Mm-hmm. I rewatched Your Name, which I think it's called like Kimi no Kawa, but it's essentially a Japanese film about time travel and first love and rural life versus city life, and that's always been a comfort watch for me. And then lastly, in terms of what I'm reading right now, it's been a little bit because I've been traveling on tour.
Yes, yeah.
I'm trying to remember my most recent. Magic for Beginners by Kelly Ling, which is a short story collection. And I just felt so mesmerized and blown away by her creativity, because I think with short stories in particular, you have to create a whole new world with every story.
Yeah.
And it's something that I am so envious of, but I just find that all my ideas, even if I initially set out to write a short story, they just keep growing and growing and growing until it becomes, 400 pages. But I love to enjoy short stories by other authors and just simmer in the creativity.
Yeah. Oh, Kelly Ling's short stories are amazing, and her full-length novel, The Book of Love, that came out earlier this year, is also exquisite. So
I can't wait.
She could do both. That's crazy. But yeah, some wonderful stuff out there. But thank you so much for joining us today, and we're going to obviously get you to sign 10 copies for us now. And for anyone watching at home, signed copies will be available very soon on our website and in all 9 of our stores. But yes, we will speak to you very soon. Bye.
If you're enjoying watching Forbidden Planet TV and you're enjoying watching us talk to the world's most interesting and accomplished filmmakers, authors, artists, musicians, creators, subscribe right here. See you soon.